Hey everyone, Andre here, along with Tom, and a very special guest being Eugene Jarvis from Raw Thrills, who's the creator of the Cruis'n series. So we're here to discuss their history with the Cruis'n games, of course, their time at Raw Thrills, and just all kinds of stuff, and find out what's going on with Cruis'n Blast on the Nintendo Switch, which is releasing probably by the time you see this imminently, it's not already. So Eugene, how are you doing today?
Great, Andre. You know, it's just a thrill to be on with you and Tom on GameXplain, and let's do it, man.
That's so awesome to hear.
Thank you.
It's an honor for me to talk with you because I've been a huge fan of the Cruis'n series ever since the original. In fact, I think I owe you thanks because it was because of Cruis'n USA that I got a Nintendo 64 because my dad at the time, he worked in insurance, he had a client who worked at Nintendo, and he was able to give me a tour at Nintendo when I was like 9 years old. And as part of the tour, they had a Cruis'n USA arcade machine.
Oh, nice!
Yep, and it had the whole like Ultra 64 ad back in the day, like advertising the upcoming hardware. And then my dad saw that. He did not care about games at all at that time. And he's like, that game looks amazing. You can get it that console. I'm like, yes. So thank you, Eugene, for making an amazing series that I've had a blast playing all this time.
There's still a lot of people out there waiting for their Ultra 64. You know, maybe it's coming. You know, there's an N64, but that
right, not the Ultra 64. I'm guessing questions about that. I'm sure later on. So I guess before we get into the nitty gritty and everything, did you want to just give us a quick overview of yourself? How you got started in games and how you got to where you are now.
Okay. I was California boy. I guess are you Seattle? Are you?
I'm Seattle now and before, but I lived in California for about 12 years before I moved back here 2 years ago.
Oh, cool, man. So I was like a Silicon Valley boy before there was even a Silicon Valley. We were picking pears and apricots, and they were pretty darn good. But so I kind of got into the ground floor and. When I was a teenager, they came up with this thing called microprocessors, and I was like, holy shit, you can have a computer, and and everybody goes, everybody's going, well, what do I need a computer for? Like, there's nothing to do with it, and then we found out there was games, so
thank God.
So, but it was crazy. I when I was a kid, I remember actually going to I was a member of the Homebrew Computer Club, which met at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. And we would go and see the latest and greatest computers and that were, mainly home built or small companies. And these couple of hippie kids that hadn't showered in a while and had sandals on came in and introduced this new computer called the Apple I. And we're like, we're kind of criticizing it and like, man, it doesn't include a keyboard, like this is stupid, like blah, blah. And so I guess, Steve Jobs and Wozniak, humble beginnings, but it's amazing what happened. And so I got involved in the whole video game thing. Actually, originally, I played a game. There was this game called Space War, which was down in actually at Stanford University in the Student Center. They had a version of it. I think it was called the Galaxy game. And it was actually the first arcade video game, if you can believe it. And it was running on like $100,000 DEC mini computer. And they had a hell of a budget, and, but it was just, totally, no one had seen anything like this. This was years before, or maybe, it's maybe a pre-Pong, maybe a year before Pong. And it was just like, it was amazing, this whole world out there, and you're flying spaceships, player versus player, battle, with this gorgeous vector graphics. It was unbelievable. And so I kind of, like, wow, that's really cool and that's really fun. But obviously it's, it's a $100,000 computer and nobody's going to be really able to do this. But, a couple years later, Pong comes out, and all of a sudden, it's actually more understandable. It was weird, like Space War was so advanced that, for the first thing, it just like this is crazy, but pawing really, people could actually identify with that. It was like, oh, I'm bouncing a ball, on a paddle. And so that was kind of the start of video games. And they kind of started in the arcade. Largely, I guess there was the Magnavox Odyssey thing too. So I kind of got into that, and the microprocessor came out, and then I had, as a senior at University of California, Berkeley, I had a chance to interview with this company called Atari, and they had some really cool pictures of like young people and in like bell bottoms and stuff, and like this was cool, man, like but they never called me back, and so I was like,
those jerks.
And it was like I was so naive at the time, like I could have maybe like called them and asked them what was going on. But I was like, oh, I guess I had bad breath, like, oh well, I guess I'll, another job. Eventually, actually I took a job at HP, but then I only lasted 3 days there. But they called me back finally, and I was like super glad to work with them for I think it was like $11,000 a year back in those days. And but it's really in games, it's never been really about the money. It's about having fun and the adventure, the challenge of doing games. And so I had a chance to work at Atari with Nolan Bushnell, and some crazy days there. I remember the inter-office mail. They had these big envelopes that they had this, private mail system. You'd have a string on it, you cross out one name, put on your name, send to the next guy. And I was stunned to find out that this was primarily for delivery of pot. The employees.
Nice.
And that was, I don't know. I never had a good time, that pot and programming didn't go together too well. But being a programmer, I really needed to kind of get my brain focused.
Yeah. That's what I imagine.
But anyway, so enough of that. But so I got kind of hooked on that. I was actually working on pinball machines at that time. I was a great pinball player, and I love pinball, and eventually worked my way back to Chicago to do pinball, and then had a chance to do the first video game for a company called Williams, which is no longer in existence, but and it was a game called Defender. And so I kind of got into video games, and and Space Invaders was probably a big game changer that got me off of pinball and into video games. So I've been doing it ever since with a game called Robotron, and I did some games in the 80s, Narc and Smash TV, and then got into the Cruis'n series.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say it's with Robotron, you kind of invented twin joystick or twin stick gaming in a way, didn't you? Or
yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think that was the first game that really popularized that controller, and it was kind of magic. I used to play this game. There was a game called Berserk, which was a really cool robot game. And it had just one joystick. Like every game had one joystick in those days. And it was very frustrating because you really want to be able to retreat from something and then fire at it at the same time, or you want to be able to run to the right and shoot to the left, or shoot up and run to and it was so frustrating. And I working on Robotron, I realized it would be so much fun to be able to shoot with one hand and run with the other. And so it's so natural because, when you're running around shooting people with your gun, I mean, you need to shoot in different directions. So, Robotron, the weirdest thing about that was, though, because once you create a really powerful interface, then you have to make the bad guys worse, because you have this balance. So it's like you think like, oh, you're doing such a great thing for the players and give them this wonderful controller, but then you have to figure out now how to take it away from them and destroy them.
Right, it's still an arcade game, right? So
Exactly.
you got to eat those quarters.
Right, and so that was, I mean, it was, kind of like the mobile field today. I mean, mobile is like, how do I get it their money? How do I, force them to upgrade? How do I make them buy more lives or more time or more moves or, whatever. And the arcade was just like, how do I kill them and get their money? I mean, it's the same damn thing. So, then of course you had to up the enemies to the point that, you could destroy them. And Robotron was kind of fun in that, so many games before, like Space Invaders, the stuff would just come down. And Robotron was like, well, what's the next thing? It's like, that's like one dimension. What's the next thing? 2 dimensions where the shit comes from all directions simultaneously, like, okay, I could see a challenge there. And so that was kind of the, Robotron controller meets, everything coming from everywhere, and it was really fun working in that early phase of games because it was in some ways very small projects with just a couple of coders and maybe only one coder and maybe an artist, maybe the coders were artists. And, you can notice, the artwork, from the quality of the artwork, you could tell that maybe the coders were the artists, so it was just a fun, pioneering kind of spirit in those days. And so it's neat to see, but, then you just put like Robotron up against, see Cruis'n Blast and like, what universe are these? There's 2 different universes. It's like, how, it's so crazy the progress of the last 40 years.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, it's still like it still feels like a somewhat new medium, but it's progressed so far since then. Like I feel like it's like even compared to like the motion picture industry, like going from black and white to color to to modern films, like you don't have the jump. I feel like that we had with gaming, right, where you go from these 8-bit or less characters to these giant 3D worlds, But one thing that seems to have largely stayed true, I think, through your gameography, I suppose, is that you've primarily been focused on like arcade games, I believe, most of the time.
Yeah.
And which is interesting because arcades they basically went away for a while. It seems like you probably know more about this than I do. Yeah. Obviously, they began huge, basically went away, but they've had a bit of a resurgence recently with places like Dave and Buster's or other kinds of arcades and kind of like more like adult focused like hangout spots. And I was curious like how that's kind of been for you on the game development side of things, like. How has it been working in games or arcade games all this time, and how has the process of making arcade games changed because of the changing marketplace?
Yeah, I mean the arcade. It's interesting. The arcade experience has kind of a lot of time. It's kind of like a sideshow at a carnival or something. That's kind of the the history is really like carnivals and some somewhat shady taking of people's money with deceptive games and stuff, and I guess the video games are just the next the next level of that. But
never thought of it like that way. Wow, you're kind of right.
But especially some of the mobile games these days are doing too good of a job of that
That's
stuff.
True.
But it's been kind of an ups and downs thing because it's weird. It's kind of like it's driven both by obviously technology. Where we've gone from, 8-bit to, 5 gazillion bits, and to 1 megahertz to 5 zillion gigahertz. But the technology alone, is not really fun, So there's like game styles and introduce some new genres of games and that seems like really revolutionizes the industry over time. And the arcade is, unfortunately, it's kind of limited to a 3 minutes get their money format.
Right.
And it just seems like that's the way it works, and it's like a 30-second commercial or whatever. Just there's things that work and you can't. There's something human about that. Like 2 or 3 minutes. It's like a horse race almost. It's like. That's the attention span, and so it's a very fast paced, but maybe you can have a game that's a number of 3-minute things hooked together to have a really in-depth experience. So it tends to be a short format, and there's there's been different phases of the arcade. In the early 80s, it was the shooting games like Defender and Asteroids and things like that, and then there was the what we called character games, which is like Donkey Kong, Mario and Pac-Man, and and they're still obviously it's very strong today. Just all kinds of I guess later in Crash Bandicoot and Ratchet and Clank and whatever ad infinitum.
Yeah.
And then you have, and then all of a sudden, like, I remember there were finally the early sports games were coming out, and it was like, I remember Atari did this football game in the arcade with just X's and O's, and that seemed like the funnest thing ever, man. That was just like so cool. And then finally, later on, I guess 20 years later, we got to do, Madden came out, and then like NFL Blitz came out.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God, these are real people. And now, I mean, you look at these sports simulations, you can't even tell if it's a game or a live broadcast. I mean, it's just it's unbelievable where this stuff has gone. And so the arcade kind of was I think what popular. We had that big boom, and it kind of was a supernova. That just blew up, and for 2 or 3 years there in the late 70s, early 80s, that's all anybody did was play arcade games. And then it kind of just morphed into all these different universes of, you had console games, you had the PC games started coming out, then we got into online games and MMOs and, boom, and cell phone games. And so it was kind of like the nucleus of something, but it blew into all these other fields. And so it became very cannibalistic, where we would perfect a genre in the arcade, say, for instance, like like Mario games, and then you come out with the Super or Nintendo, NES, and then all of a sudden everybody's playing that at home, and so all those games are dead in the arcade. So then, what do we do now? Okay, we'll do driving simulation. We'll do fighting games. We'll chop people's heads off. Oh, that's cool. And then you run through that for 5 or 10 years, and then all of a sudden, they've got Xboxes and PlayStations, and and everybody's playing driving games and fighting games, and God knows what games on their console, and are on their PC, and so. The industry kind of has to evolve. It kind of eats itself, and the arcade has to keep trying for new frontiers, trying for something new. And so that was obviously the Cruis'n USA was like the frontier of 1991, 90 to 94 era. And so now, for the arcade to stay relevant, we have to keep reinventing ourselves. And now it's kind of we have this new kind of arcade thing where we're getting into. It's weird how people are getting into their cell phones, which are kind of small screens. We're like, well, hell, what can we do? Well, we can make things that are 12 feet high, and we made like this giant Space Invaders game, and we made giant Pac-Man, and we have we did this our Jurassic Park game, it's huge kind of movie theater cabinets and stuff, and so we're kind of embracing the power of the humongous, at the same time and I think some people have been watching their cell phone so long that they forgot there was actually a screen in their living room,
Right.
So they get to an arcade, they go, whoa, this is so cool, man. It's like...
That's a good point.
It's a very, very literal go big or go home in that case.
Exactly, and so we have to have things that more experiential, so we have more different types of controllers, tactical controllers, driving controllers, and kind of the latest iteration of that, I think, is we're starting to get into like VR games in the arcade, and and it's interesting how the VR thing has always been. I mean, for years and years and years, it was always like the next biggest thing, the next great thing that never came. You know, and you know, like I remember we had this big VR craze in the early '90s, and
the Virtual Boy.
yeah, the Virtual Boy, and then there was also the what was the guys? Jared Lanier. Remember Jared Lanier with the from VPL? He had the glove and the I guess it was Lawnmower Man. The movie.
That's it. Yeah.
And but so there was actually some arcade VR games at that point, and you go, oh my god, that's so cool, and you put the headset on and walk around a little bit. And, you're starting to get sick, and it's like, yeah, man, this is really and then like after your 2 minutes you're up, be like. Your buddy goes, hey, how was that? And you go, oh, that was amazing, man. You try it, and it's like, and you're like, okay, that's my VR experience for the next 4 years. And so I think, we're in kind of the nausea phase for a long time there. But the latest iteration of VR stuff actually is pretty cool.
Yeah.
The getting the frame rate up to 90 frames per second and the 4K video and stuff. It actually it looks pretty real. It's not just a hype story. And so we introduced a VR game earlier this year called King Kong of Skull Island VR, and it's a motion simulator VR thing. And then we have a motion capture of your hands, so you can actually just play the game with your hands.
Oh, that's cool.
And you don't have to like strap on a glove or do anything. You just, your hands are just boom, they're on. And so it's partly, to make it really consumer friendly. It has to be kind of almost just magical, like things just has to work immediately and not, like, oh shit, I gotta, calibrate my foot socks, like, no, it's not gonna work. You have to like get in the game and like, boom, it's gotta work,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, especially with the attention span people have these days, particularly when they're drinking at some of these arcades.
But I think that's really what saved the arcade. You talk about the arcades kind of went away, and they really were having a hard time competing against the technology of the home systems and the amazing software and some longer forms of entertainment. It didn't just be a 2 or 3 minute game. And I think the big innovation was beer.
Craft beer.
And so rose the beercade and all those things, and obviously Dave and Buster's, they've kind of been doing that. Nobody really noticed. It's weird, like there still was arcades, but somehow they died in everybody's mind, but they still actually existed. And then all of a sudden they're back. I guess it's for some reason the media likes to kill things and then bring them back. It becomes more interesting that way. It's like
it's so true.
I was going to ask quickly, with King Kong being in VR, was that maybe a game that you had to put the most sort of testing and user feedback in? Because it's a lot harder to make a VR game than a standard game, and getting people to look at the right places and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, that was definitely, and it was kind of a challenge because we were designing that during the pandemic.
Yeah,
and so we really didn't get it to test it until the last few months, and so we actually had video cameras on the game, and it was, I mean, it was we learned a hell of a lot once we started watching people. I mean, it was there were just some crazy things that. That were totally obvious once you watch somebody, get confused, and like there was like it was somebody that was using like the headset of the next chair and their chair, and like it was we just go, man, we were really dumb to have that happen, just it's amazing how people can get confused on if something's not designed properly, and so we had had a lot of feedback, and it's amazing how just having players play your game, and not people that have played it 1,000 times, because you get totally biased. You need that new testing, new eyes, and so we really learned a lot about VR and tried to make it very seamless, and And it was a very fun project, and it is pretty amazing what it really has. People would play it and they just couldn't believe it. You know, they so many of the average person, like for expert people like ourselves, you know, like VR has been around, you know, they've been hawking VR very heavily for the last 3 or 4 years, and like you can't imagine like no one has ever done this, you know. But
Right.
I would think 95% of the population has no idea what VR is and has never done it.
Yeah.
And to them, it's and to be able to, you know, and now that the technology is really viable, I mean, it blows their minds. They can't believe, you know, that kind of they're in this universe and they're interacting with it, and it really is magical. So I think that's finally, you know, I think Zuckerberg's vision maybe is coming true. We'll see what happens, but you know, after a few. Maybe it wasn't $2 billion. Maybe after a couple of $1 trillion, something will happen.
Yes, to throw enough money at it and you can make it happen. But yeah, I mean, to your point, like my dad, who used to not play games at all, but has more recently, after retiring, he is obsessed with VR right now. Like my mom got him an Oculus Quest a few months ago, and he's just been playing that nonstop. So yeah, it really does speak to, I think it will help bring in more people, but you do want to make that first impression being a good one. You know, they have a bad first impression in the VR, they may not go back to it. So
well, exactly. I mean, you go to a restaurant and, you know, after the first course, you're, you know, feeling kind of queasy. You know, after the second course, you're making your exit, you know, into the bathroom, and, you know, you're not going to eat in that restaurant again, you know, and so I think VR had that problem, but it's getting resolved. It's pretty amazing.
Now, speaking of making first impressions, one of the key things I think, or maybe not key, but an important element of making an arcade game in particular, is having an eye-catching cabinet. And that's something I think that you guys have like consistently nailed. From, you know, like walking through Dave & Buster's, like your cabinets constantly stand out, whether it's you know, Cruis'n Blast or the Halo, I forget the full name, the Halo title that you worked
Halo
on.
Team Raven, yeah.
Right. So do you design the cabinets yourself, and how's that process work exactly?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. We actually have some very experienced guys who have been, and some new guys too. I think that the secret recipe is you need some like old farts that really have been there and done it all, and then you need like some young kids who don't know you can't do anything, and you kind of put that together, you know.
Right.
The guys who know it all, and the guys who believe they do know it all, and you get them together, and you get that chemistry. And so, you know, it's you really, you know, you have like 10 seconds to catch people's eyes. I mean, it's.
Right.
It's kind of like, you know, it's like the 1,000 channel or the million channels of video out there. And how do you, or, you know, I mean, you're on iTunes store. I mean, there's, I don't know, what, 10 million games or something? You know, how do you get people's attention? And so when the arcade is, luckily we're only fighting like 120 games or something. And, you know, it's like LEDs, man. It's like, you know, like get your LEDs flashed and get some, you know, have some great artwork, you know, have really cool looking controls, and, you know, you have to have cool looking chairs, and, you know, down lighting, up lighting, you know, shiny, you know, it's like shiny objects. I remember when I first saw World of Warcraft, and I was like, this is so cool. Everything glows, you know, everything. I realized like, this is like, you know, the fourth law of nature, you know, everything must glow, you know, and that's what you do, man.
Yeah.
Just make everything glow and make it a cool glow. And, you know, I remember back in the 80s or 90s, these electronic stores used to, like in cities, they'd always have like strobe lights just shooting out at you, you know, like, and it would blind you, but you wouldn't go, what the hell is that? You know, like, and so we're kind of doing that same thing, you know, just trying to get people's attention, and just, you want to show them like some, you know, like an experience. Obviously you have to have a great attract mode, and just show them something they can't resist, you know, and they have to do, you know. And
Hey everyone, Future Andre here, and thank you so much for watching part 1 of our interview with Eugene Jarvis. But we're just getting started, because in part 2 we're diving into the Cruis'n games, including Cruis'n USA, Cruis'n World, Cruis'n Exotica, and more, along with what it was like to work with Nintendo and having Ultra 64 branded arcade cabinets, and then porting the game to the Nintendo 64 hardware, plus tons more. And then in part 3, we're talking all about Cruis'n Blast, including the original 2017 arcade game, as well as bringing it to Nintendo Switch. And we asked a ton of questions about it. It's all a ton of fun and really insightful, so make sure you don't miss any of them. And with that, thanks for watching, and of course make sure to click the subscribe button and ring that bell to stay up to date on Cruis'n Blast and everything else Nintendo Switch as well. We'll catch you later. Bye everyone!